Hey everybody, Chris Americos here from RussianToRussian.com, where we help you speak and understand Russian language and culture. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you how to say who you are in Russian. Now, if you've been studying Russian for any period of time, then you've probably had to introduce yourself to someone. And you probably know that the easiest way to do this is just by saying, "Я Chris." Right? My name's Chris, so I just say, I am Chris. Я Chris. So in Russian, we don't have to use the verb to be. We can actually leave that out in the present tense. And we can just say, I, Chris. Я Chris. And of course, change my name to your name. Don't say that you are me. But there are other ways that we can say who we are, and there are a lot of other ways that people might ask who we are. So we're going to talk about how to introduce yourself and also how people might ask you to introduce yourself. But first of all, how do you even say that phrase in Russian? Introduce yourself. There's a verb, представиться, and this means to introduce yourself. Представиться, or in the imperfective, представляться. So what are some other ways that you can say who you are when you meet someone? You can say, меня зовут Chris. You probably learned that in your first Russian lesson. Меня зовут Chris. And this literally means they call me Chris, right? Меня is me, зовут is they call, and Chris is Chris. That's me. So those are the main two ways that you say who you are when you meet someone. You say, я Chris, or you say, меня зовут Chris. Okay, great. Now you can introduce yourself, but will you understand when a person wants you to introduce yourself? This can be a little tricky because people like to be creative and use different phrases and different questions to ask what your name is. The standard question that most people learn when they start studying Russian is, как тебя зовут? And this literally means, how do they call you? Or what do they call you? And you usually answer by saying, меня зовут Chris, or я Chris, but you are not Chris. Well, maybe you are.
Crisscross.
So you probably already know that phrase, but it's important for me to say right here at this moment in the video that you need to remember who you're talking to. Because you don't ask someone, как тебя зовут, if you need to speak formally. If they're older than you, if they're in a respected position, then you need to use respectful, formal language, and you need to say, как вас зовут. So instead of как тебя зовут, you say, как вас зовут. And it means the same thing, it just means that you're showing respect to the person who you're speaking to. Now, it doesn't mean that when you say как тебя зовут, you're showing disrespect. No, it's still okay to say that, just you're going to use that more with people your own age, with friends, with people who you already know and you're already on common speaking terms. You know, you're not speaking formally. Another way that people might ask who you are is by saying, кто ты? And this literally means who you. Who are you? Now this sounds a little rougher, and I might say this to a person who knocks on my door and tries to get into my apartment. Кто ты? Like, who are you? And to answer this question, you could say, я Chris, or меня зовут Chris. And remember, if we're speaking formally, then we need to change the word ты to вы. Кто вы? And it means the same thing. It means, who are you? Another thing to remember about Russian, though, is that the word кто doesn't always translate to the English who. Sometimes it means what. You see, in English, who always talks about a specific person. When we use the word who, we're trying to understand how one person is different from all other people. But in Russian, the word кто is about things that are animate, not inanimate. So what does that mean and how is that different? Well, yeah, people are animate, but animals are also animate. So imagine a situation where an animal runs by you and you didn't see what animal it was, but you saw it was definitely an animal. Let's say it was a dog.
My baby dog.
In English, you're going to ask the question, what was that? But in Russian, you're going to ask the question, кто это был? Or just, кто это? So you see, in Russian, you're going to use the word кто, but in English, you're going to use the word what. And that's why you can't always, 100% of the time, translate the word кто to who. Another question that people might ask you is как мне вас называть? Which is really like, how can I call you? Or what can I call you? You can use the same standard answers here, but this question is a little more creative, a little less standard, and that's why it might throw you off. It might catch you off guard when you don't expect it. Because if you always think that people are going to ask the same questions the same way, you're going to be disappointed. People like to be creative, and they like to ask different questions and use different combinations of words, just like we do in English. So again, that phrase was как мне вас называть? The verb называть, or the perfective form назвать, means to name something. And you can use this with other questions too. For example, if I don't know how to say this type of hat in Russian, then I could ask, как это называется? How is this called? Or what is this called? And the verb назвать comes from the root verb звать, which means to call. Вы меня звали?
Мам, ты меня звала?
This means, were you calling me? Like, were you trying to get my attention? Right? If someone says your name, Chris, over here! Chris, иди сюда! Then we can say that someone is calling me, right? They're calling for me to come to where they are. So in this situation, we would use the word звать. Another creative question that someone might ask to understand who you are or to learn your name is как мама с папой вас назвали? This means, what did your mom and dad call you? Or what did your mom and dad name you? Again, if you always think that people are going to say как тебя зовут, and that's the only phrase for, learning someone's name, then this is going to catch you off guard and you're going to be confused. That's why it's good to learn a lot of different phrases and a lot of different questions and ways that people might ask you this, right? So again, that was как мама с папой вас назвали? And of course I used вас here, so that's formal, but we could also say как мама с папой тебя назвали? And that'll make it informal. Now, another way that someone might try to get you to say your name is when you're in a group of people and your friend wants to introduce you to someone else. So your friend might say, Chris, знакомься, это Вася. And this means like, Chris, meet this guy, he is Vasya. So the word that he used, which was a command, is знакомься, which means like meet this person. Or if he's talking to more than one person, he might say, Chris, Vasya, знакомьтесь. This means like meet each other. This is from the verb знакомиться, which means to meet someone for the first time, to get to know someone for the first time. It can also be just to get to know something. Hopefully you're never in this situation, but someone might tell you, не хочу знакомиться. This means I don't want to meet you, or I don't want to meet new people in general. Or if you go to someone's social media page, you might see in their status, я не знакомлюсь. This means I don't meet new people, or I'm not open for making new acquaintances. Знакомиться has the same root as other words that are about people who you know or you don't know. For example, a stranger in Russian is незнакомец. It's a person who you don't know. And you probably know the word for friend, which is друг, or a friend who's a girl, подруга. But how do you say acquaintance? Someone who's not really your friend, but you know them. Well, in Russian, it's знакомый. So someone can ask, hey, Chris, do you know Vasya? And I can say, да, мы знакомы. It means, yes, we know each other. Yes, we are acquaintances. In English, we tend to lean on the word friend a little too much, and we use the word friend about people who really aren't our friends. But in Russian, people tend to be a little stricter about who they call their friend, and everyone else is just знакомый. And I don't know if you're like me, but I have a problem. I meet people and then I forget their face, I forget their name, and then a year or two later, I'll see them again, and I'll say, oh, hi, nice to meet you. Приятно познакомиться. Nice to meet you. And they'll say, Chris, мы уже познакомились. Chris, we've already met. We've already become acquaintances. Okay, another example of being in a group and having to introduce yourself is when you're standing there and maybe you're new in the group, maybe you're the foreign guy and you just got to this group of Russian-speaking people, and the person who invited you there says, Представься. Or maybe someone else in the group says, Представься. And this means introduce yourself. Or if someone is speaking to you in a formal way, they might say, Представьтесь. This uses the conjugation of the verb for вы instead of ты. It makes it formal. Another very polite way to ask for someone's name is to say, Как я могу к вам обращаться? Обращаться means to address someone or to speak to someone in a certain manner. Someone can ask, Кому ты обращаешься? And this means, like, who are you talking to, or who are you addressing with your speech? So the phrase «Как я могу к тебе обращаться» or «Как я могу к вам обращаться», informal and formal, it really means how can I address you? What can I call you? How can I speak with you? And again, if someone asks you this question, it's very polite, especially if they use вам instead of тебе. Okay, let's imagine another situation. Somebody calls you on the phone and they're talking and you don't know who that is. And you can say, Я бы хотел знать, с кем я говорю. Like, I would like to know who I'm speaking with. Or maybe you just got introduced at a party and you've been speaking a little bit and now the person is kind of like, I don't know who you are, tell me your name. Я хотел бы знать, с кем я говорю. And basically you can take this phrase to mean, what's your name? Right? All of these phrases are basically, what's your name? What can I call you? How can I address you? And the answer to all of these questions can just be those standard answers that we talked about in the beginning. Я Крис, меня зовут Крис. Of course, if you want to make longer, more complicated sentences, then you can use the exact verbs and phrases that I've just taught you and reverse engineer them to say a sentence as an answer instead of a question. Now, typically, when someone asks what your name is, you ask what their name is also, right? So, for example, they say, Кто ты? Who are you? Я Крис. I'm Chris. А ты кто? And who are you? So we usually ask the person back the same question or a similar question. And this happens all the time. And there's some fast, easy ways for you to do this. You can say, А ты? If the question used ты, then you can ask back, А ты? If the question used вы, А вы? It means and you, right? And you in the informal, а ты? And you in the formal, а вы? But for a lot of these questions, the word ты and вы changes to a different grammatical case. So we need to remember that when we're asking the question back, because it won't make sense if we use the wrong case. For example, if someone said, Как тебя зовут? They didn't say, Как ты зовут? That's wrong. Как тебя зовут? Тебя. And so if we want to ask them back, we have to say, А тебя? А тебя как зовут? So imagine the situation. Как тебя зовут? What's your name? Меня зовут Крис. My name is Chris. А тебя? And you? А тебя как зовут? А тебя как зовут? What's your name? If we haven't met yet, then you should join us on the next live video. You can go to the live tab of this YouTube channel and you can watch the previous live call that we had. And you can join us next time and practice speaking with me live. And then I can ask you, А тебя как зовут? And you can answer me. While you're here, why don't you also go down to the description under this video and check out the course that we have about the Russian language. We have certified teachers of Russian as a foreign language who can help you learn and understand Russian language and culture. They've taught diplomats at the American Embassy in Russia. They've taught businessmen from the UK and from the US. They've taught regular people all over the world, and they can teach you too. Now, we talked about two different ways that people might ask who you are and ask what your name is. They might say, Как тебя зовут? And they might say, Кто ты? And a lot of English speakers who are learning Russian are tempted to introduce themselves using a phrase like, Мое имя Крис, because it sounds so close to the English, my name is Chris, right? Мое имя Крис. But the truth is that when we use this phrase, it sounds a little strange. Most people don't say it that way in Russian. Probably because if we break down the word name, Usually when we say name in Russian, people are only thinking about the first name, because the word imя actually just means first name. Each person in Russian has 3 different names. They have имя, which is first name, отчество, which is their middle name, or more appropriately, the patronymic name, the name that's taken from their father's first name. And then they have familia, which is last name. And those names work differently from English names, where we have any first name that we want, any middle name that we want, and then a last name that comes from our family. In Russian, имя can be any name that you want, but usually it's a standard Russian name. And then отчество comes from your father's first name and has an ending depending on if you're male or female. And then, of course, familia comes from your family, the same as in English. But in Russian, the familia, the last name, will have a different ending depending on if you're male or female. So, for example, if a person has the last name Gorbachev, that's a man. But if it's a woman, it would be Gorbacheva. The last name Putin is for a man, and Putina would be for a woman. Or Yeltsin would be a man, and Yeltsina will be for a woman. If you want to learn more about Russian names, I made a video about that topic, so you can click here and you can go watch that video. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you liked it, press like, and make sure you subscribe and press that bell notification button so you get notified when future videos come out. And I hope to see you in the next video. Пока! До следующего видео!